because it doesn't just go away, because there's always just spreading around the earth. The common cold constantly just spreading around the earth. Okay, so it doesn't just go away. Viruses don't just go away. The flu didn't just go away. And they keep giving you shots every winter for it. Every winter, here's a shot after the different strand that you had last winter. It's just not as deadly as COVID. Now, COVID's not, COVID doesn't kill everybody that has it. Most people who have COVID, they survive it. I mean, they're doing okay with COVID. Most people, but the small percentage of people that it kills is a large number of people, because there's over 300 million people in the U.S. and there's over 7 billion people on the planet. So you take a 1% of 7 billion, it's still a lot of people. It's millions of people dying from COVID. So anyway, this conversation that I had with a guy at work, and he and I've had this conversation before, but I never expressed myself in this way, because he said the same thing that a lot of people have said. And he said, I think somebody in his family. See, I can't even remember. But he said his wife or his aunt, mother, sister-in-law, somebody was a nurse, and that the numbers of cases of COVID are inflated. Because he said these medical centers, they get money for the amount of COVID cases that they have. So they report a lot more COVID cases than they actually have, so that they can get paid. Now, I didn't even tell him. I was just listening to him. We were talking about COVID, and then he said, well, because there's a guy we work with who was out of work. He's not working because of COVID. He said that his mother tested positive for COVID, and he was in contact with his mother. And so they told him to stay home from work and get tested for COVID. Go get tested. And so that's where the conversation stems from. We're talking about a co-worker staying home and getting tested, and he had to stay home for 4 days, because that's the incubation period for COVID. 4 days, that's the incubation period. So even though he hadn't been tested yet, they told him to stay home for 4 days because he was in contact with his mother. He was in the room with her. They were not wearing masks. And, he was talking to his mother. I don't know if they have dinner together or whatever, but, enough contact for him to could have contracted the virus. So anyway, we're having this conversation, and the guy tells me that his family member is in the medical profession, and the numbers for COVID are inflated. Now, what I neglected to say to him, and which I will tell him another time, you know what I mean? Because this is what I was thinking after he said this. After he told me that the COVID numbers are inflated, I was thinking, no, they're not. And here's why. Because if you think about all the people in the U.S., and we're just talking about the U.S., we weren't talking about the world, because you know how people in the U.S. are concerned with themselves. They're not worried about anyone else in the world. So, if you think about all the people in the U.S. who have contracted COVID, not all the people who have COVID have even been tested. So if you say the COVID numbers are inflated, you're wrong, because not all positive people who are positive with COVID have even been tested, because some people don't want to be tested. Some people don't want to know for sure that they have COVID, because they don't want to be sent home from work. Okay? And I had even my sister tell me that our cousin told her that she's not going to get tested for COVID, whether she has symptoms or not, because she needs to keep working. All right? It was bad enough for some people that they got laid off work, because not everybody was getting that $600 from the unemployment, the extra $600 that they were giving you when you were on unemployment. And in addition to the unemployment money that you were already receiving, some people were getting an addition $600, but that only lasted up until July. And then after that, you go back to, if you were still laid off, you went back to whatever money that you would get on unemployment. So what I'm saying to you is, for those of you who think the numbers for COVID are inflated, I'm saying to you, no, they're not, because there's millions of people, not the hundreds, millions of people who contracted COVID and would not get tested because they didn't want anyone to know that they had COVID and tell them to go home and quarantine. A lot of people have had COVID and were not tested, so the numbers are not inflated. If you was to find out how many millions of people actually was positive for COVID and didn't even test because they didn't want to get, they didn't want to get outed or get sent home from their jobs, I think the numbers are probably a lot less than what the actual positive cases that we have. So it was over 11 million cases and 246,000 deaths officially is what we are up to now. But the COVID has exploded again, and the president was wrong again when he said on November 4th, you won't hear anything else about COVID. This guy is the biggest. I've never seen somebody feel sorry for themselves like President Trump does. Everything is against him in his mind. And the way he lies about everything. And he deceives people because he's got this base. He's got a lot of, people who follow and they believe in the guy. But to hear him tell it, everyone is against him, when he's the one is doing most of the deceiving and the scheming behind the scenes to try to stay in power. So, last podcast that I did, the last show that I done last week, I said that Joe Biden had gotten 74 million votes nationwide, because it was just after the election last podcast, and that President Trump had gotten 70 million. At that time, that's what it was. They weren't done counting. They weren't done counting all the votes, but they had counted enough of them to know who was going to win. Like, they didn't have enough votes left for President Trump to win, so they knew that Joe Biden was going to win. So last weekend, on Saturday, all the news organizations, even Fox, declared Joe Biden the winner of the election. And President Trump was in denial. He's still in denial. He's still saying that Joe Biden won, but the only way he won is because the election was rigged. And that is not true. That's nonsense. He's only saying that because he lost. He's a sore loser. The guy can't accept that he just lost, legitimately lost. He knew he was going to lose. That's why he was trying to rig the election by suppressing the vote. That's why he put this guy DeJoy in charge of the Postal Service, so he could rig the election by not letting ballots reach the Board of Elections on time to be counted. See, if your ballot was not postmarked by the 3rd of November, then a lot of states will not count it. So, but Trump showed his hand too early. I mean, it was a couple of months before the election when we seen, I can't remember the guy's first name, but his name is DeJoy. When we seen this guy get hired and take over the post office, and he starts removing the sorting machines out of different post offices all over the country and causing the mail to be delivered at a lot slower rate. Their plan was obvious. I mean, if you remove sorting machines from the mail, then of course it's going to be slower. But Trump showed his hand too early. You know, if he had done that 3 weeks before the election, there would have been nothing anybody could do about it. So, yeah, he had a scheme that didn't work. So he just decided litigation is my next attempt to steal the election. You know, get a bunch of lawyers to file lawsuits. He was hoping that it would be caught up in lawsuits for so long that he could just stay in office until they got it cleared up. But to his dismay, judges started throwing these lawsuits out of court because they are without merit. They don't have any reason. So you got to have some proof when you file a lawsuit. You got to say, this is what's going on and here's why, and lay out the proof. They didn't have, Trump's lawyers, they didn't have any proof of voter fraud. They alleged that voter fraud had happened, but they didn't have any evidence. So the judges actually just didn't have any choice but to throw out the lawsuits, because they didn't present them with any evidence of it. They just claimed that that's what was going on, that there's voter fraud. And, and a lot of people say, they send in ballots to dead people. Yeah, but if the dead people don't return the ballots, that's not voter fraud. Just receiving a ballot in the mail is not voter fraud. Voter fraud is when someone who shouldn't be voting by law, who is not a registered voter, who is a live person, votes. So